Hello, this is RICKY, the Android guy. Hey guys, welcome to the highly anticipated side-by-side comparison between the Galaxy S4 and the HTC One. These are the creme de la creme of Android right now. Everyone is pretty much deciding between these two phones, and since the iPhone 5S will not be out till the fall, these are pretty much going to be the top two sellers most likely. So, which one will reign supreme? Well, we're going to find out and see which one holds more weight and which one's the best overall for you. Remember, we do go by categories here, so let's see which categories fit your needs. When it comes to look and feel, these two are almost completely opposite, as you've heard by now on other comparisons. So the difference is that HTC went to go with a all aluminum body, which is been praised for its style, the way it feels, and the way it feels in the hand, and of course its front two speakers, which I am, is my Achilles heel. I do love that they have that. So it's really a nice all-around looking design and phone. It does of course have beats, but I will clarify that later on the sound portion and what that really means. And just a really nice simplistic design before we get to the UI. The UI sense is not the favorite of most. You have this new thing, Blink Feed, which some people like, some people don't. And you have now a clock in your section for apps, app drawer. So it's kind of interesting to see, all of these takes on it and if people like that more or not. On the Samsung, however, they went pretty much the exact opposite route, which is a polycarbonate plastic, which, they're really, there was really a backlash for the plastic, and a lot of people were upset about that. I have never been didn't like the plastic. It makes the phone feel a lot lighter in comparison, especially to the HTC One, which feels heavier than even phones like the Note 2. However, the plastic doesn't feel as good to some people. A lot of people don't like it. They say it feels flimsy and just doesn't feel as solid. So if that is your preference, then obviously you're going to go with the look and feel for the HTC One over the S4. In terms of the UI, TouchWiz has been, I would say, the best interface now. If you don't like stock Android, you by far will like TouchWiz over any other one compared to Sense, compared to LG, or even compared to UIs like Sony. It's just more refined, everything has been thought out, and everything is just a lot easier. So, but overall, look and feel would have to go to the One, just because they really did a different kind of style, a different kind of design, and were really helped out because of the patents they were given by iPhones. So with that, HTC takes the look and feel. When it comes to hardware, these two devices can be very similar, but at the same time, very different. So let's go over a couple of them. First of all, with the processors. Both of them have a Qualcomm 600 processor. However, their speeds do vary, with the HTC One coming at 1.7 GHz and the Galaxy S4 coming at 1.9 GHz. This might not seem that much till you add the RAM factor in. Though both claim to have 2 GB of RAM, obviously this is never fully used. However, on the HTC One, Blink Feed is taking up more of your RAM, so you're only stuck with 1.5 gigs of RAM on the HTC One of the 2 gigs, whereas on the Galaxy S4 you have 1.8. Now, while this might not seem like much, it definitely plays a factor when you have a lot of apps running. I did notice the HTC One start to stutter as you have more apps open than comparing to the Galaxy S4. Now, in terms of screen, this is another similarity, but quite different. Though both displays have a 1080p Full HD screen, they do vary on how they're used. With the HTC One having 4.7-inch screen and the Galaxy S4 having a 4-inch screen, the pixels per inch are both over 400 ppi, so although the HTC beats out by almost 10 pixels per inch, the human eye really can't tell the difference past 400. So it's more of a bragging right thing. However, where it really stands out is the LCD technology versus the LED technology. HTC has Super LCD 3, which, although it's supposed to be more energy efficient, this unit still showed that the battery does matter. When it comes to LED, it's the most energy efficient out of all screen panels. So not only are we getting brighter, richer colors, but you do also have a much better focus towards battery life and energy consumption. Not to mention that when you have both phones, the LED screen on the Samsung S4, because of its screen mode feature, can turn colors more neutral than the HTC One's LCD, or more vibrant because of its LED technology, which is a really useful feature just because you can actually see how photos will be printed out, as well as have very vibrant photos if you want them. It's just a really handy feature, and it definitely shows the advantage of a Super AMOLED screen. Now, when it comes to battery life, the HTC One has a 2350 milliamp battery, I believe, whereas the Galaxy S4 has a 2600 milliamp battery. The difference, of course, is the HTC One is not only non-removable, but it's causing the phone to really be non-repairable. Because of the battery being in between essentially the motherboard and the screen, you can't really get to it very easily. Whereas the Galaxy S4, it is a removable battery, which means not only can you take out the battery very easily and replace it, you can even have a spare battery always with you for an extra charge. And finally, we come to the internal storage, which each device has two variants of. However, they do use different type of features. The HTC One has the bigger storages, but you cannot add on to it. So their 32 gig is priced at $199, and their 64 gig is priced at $299. And as for the Galaxy S4, depending on your carrier, you do have a price of $199 for the 16 gig variant, and the 32 gig variant will be $249. However, with the Samsung Galaxy S4, you still have a micro SD card slot, so you can add up to 64 gigs of external storage anytime you'd like. When it comes to web browsing, both phones still have their respective internet browser as opposed to the Chrome browser that is the default on standard Android. However, what this does mean is both devices can, of course, use Adobe Flash if you do install it. Although Adobe Flash isn't on the Play Store anymore, there's plenty of YouTube channels like mine that show you how to install Adobe Flash if need be. Now, when viewing these screens, you do notice a subtle difference. Both of these phones are on full brightness for this review. However, Samsung has something called Adapt Display, which allows the phone to change the display to better suit your eyes. Not necessarily changing the brightness, but more changing the tones. Now what this has shown here is that it does do a darker tone because it's a white. So what that is allowing us to see is the text more clearly compared to the HTC One, even though the HTC One again has the higher pixels per inch. Since the human eye can't see over 400, it doesn't really matter, so we're just going to go with, you can see the difference side by side. Now, if you did put the HTC on auto, that would neutralize that. It would actually be darker compared to the S4 then, but for the purposes of the review, I just like putting them on full brightness on both devices. So, let's do pinch to zoom. And let's do them one at a time. So pinch to zoom very quick. Scrolling up pretty quick. Pretty similar. The HTC seems to move a little bit quicker on up to down. And then the double tap. Now this is one thing I did notice that's a bit different on the HTC. It tends to zoom in kind of all the way and doesn't really align usually properly. So depending on where you tap it, it kind of just goes off. It doesn't like fit things perfectly, whereas the Samsung doesn't zoom in as much, so which might be annoying. However, with the pixels per inch, you can kind of still see the screen really clearly, even if it's zoomed in like that. Of course, this makes it a lot easier to see this device, but you get more, which you can still is legible for most people. However, one additional feature the Samsung does boast, of course, is the Air View feature. So if you actually want to see the text bigger, you can actually just hover over with your hand at any point. Although on regular usage, when we use these very often, they seem to be very comparable. It usually goes to the Samsung just because on average it's a little bit more consistent, even though this time we did see certain features of the HTC move faster. It's a little bit more inconsistent. It reminded me a little bit of the Asus that sometimes ran really smooth and sometimes didn't run really smooth on the tablets. So I just did notice that. In terms of web browsers though, these are pretty much on par. The only really thing is that Samsung's a little bit more consistent. The smart display really does help just for your eyes, especially when outside in the sunlight, as well as when you actually hover over to being able to use Air View. Can be quite useful, especially giving you the full web browsing experience. If you don't use the magnifier, you can actually activate drop-down menus, which is again really a nice feature to have the ability to do. So because of that, the web browsing will have a slight edge to the Samsung. So for the music comparison, we all know what I'm going to pick. We all know I'm going to put the front speakers because I'm the biggest advocate of front speakers, and that's exactly what I thought when going into this. I was like, there's no way anything can beat front speakers. However, I did find it really close, and this does cause me to do a separate video on music comparison and sound comparison, because hopefully you guys will be able to hear the difference what I'm about to say afterward. So let's play both of them at the same time and play. Now, little disclaimer there, I actually had on Beats emulation on that one. So now that I have that on, or off rather, so let me turn that off. And now that I have it off, let's actually check out what the S4 normally sounds like. Because first I wanted to prove that if you have Beats emulation on both devices, the difference, and then we'll play it again. So now. This one.
The track hits your eardrum like a slug. Me in the city of sex, we in that sunshine state where the bomb ass envy. The state where you never find a dance floor empty and pimp speed. On a mission for them greens. Lean, mean, money making machines, serving fiends. I've been in the game for 10 years making rap tunes. Ever since Honeys was wearing Sassoon, now it's 95. And watch me diamond shining, looking like a Rob Liberace. It's all good, from Diego to the Bay.
Alright, so for the overall comparison with it, again I'll do a more in-depth one, but for the overall comparison between the two, it really comes down to this. For the HTC One, of course the front speakers play a huge part, and that's why I didn't flip the S4 over, because that would have been cheating. So the HTC One, because the speakers face you, it is the overall better one. However, they're really a lot closer than I originally thought they would be. The S4 is actually louder in both instances, with Beats emulation or without. However, when you have Beats emulation on there, it's a lot more clear. I feel, well, in both instances, I felt the S4 was a little bit clearer, but it's dramatically different when you have the beat simulation. I'd really feel that it's just the more powerful potential speaker. However, on the HTC One, when you have the sound, it has a lot more bass, but at the highest volume, that really does get distorted. You just hear those crackles and everything like that. So you can rewind and hear it again, but that was my overall assessment with them. If you also tend to listen to more genres such as pop or rock that doesn't use a lot of bass, you're better off with the S4 actually. However, if you do listen to more hip-hop or techno or trance, anything that uses a lot of bass, definitely the HTC One. So that would be my overall review when it comes to the music, although I just can't deny front speakers. If you guys have watched the channel, I love front speakers. I love them, love them, love them. So for the movie watching experience, you have a little bit of a different types right here. So although the HTC One has a 4.7 screen, the Galaxy S4 has a 5-inch screen. Also, you right away notice the screen quality difference between LCD and LED. Again, the Samsung has an adaptive screen technology, so if you watch a really low light video, it'll also brighten the video up so that the blacks look more gray in dark areas. However, for bright and colorful videos, the colors will stand out a lot more. So it's just, again, a really nice tweak because of the adaptive display that it does show off very well. For the purposes of volume, I'm going to put them halfway up for volume. So we get that. Okay.
Hey man, how's it going? What are you doing? Samsung wants me to be their new, big commercial. Next big thing, yeah. They call me in for the next big thing. Maybe by 1998, you were the next big thing. I've never seen you this excited about something that isn't food. You are not the next big thing. They make people physically uncomfortable. Look, man, they gave me a phone. I got one too. Did you get that? They gave it to me because I'm the next big thing. This makes no sense, man. Are you sure that maybe you're not here to see a guy named Samsung? That would make more sense. Well, you know what? Let's find a favorable review in one of your movies. No results found. You don't scream about this when you take a picture, you can draw.
So, trying to get the same frame, sorry. Actually, I can go back a little bit. Okay, so a couple things I did notice. Colors, of course, do definitely stand out a bit better with the Samsung, as where sound, of course, is going to be a bit better because of the HTC's front speakers, especially when being placed down like this. I don't have like a kickstand or anything like that, which would help Samsung sound. It's really being placed flat. So keeping that in mind, that's the first aspect of it. However, you do have to credit Samsung with one thing, and that is not only can you take, so on the HTC you can take photos or go right into editing, of course, which of course you can still do that with the Samsung as well. If you hit menu, you can go right into editing, share, and things like that. However, I do like that on the photo taking, you can actually move the frame by frame. So it's just a really nice feature that you have with Samsung. As well, of course, is on your built-in videos, you have things like pop-up play. And for YouTube videos, you have things like split screen. So you can actually have two apps open at the same time, so you can be watching like your YouTube while text messaging, which of course is really nice. For that purpose, overall, I feel like I have to give it to Samsung. I do like the front speakers, and originally I was thinking it was a tie, but because of the add-on features of when you actually watch a video, you can actually, use pop-up play for keep watching your video, as well as split screen. So if you're watching a YouTube video and you get a text message, you can actually keep watching the video while text messaging. Because of those bonus features, I just feel that overall the Samsung would be the better for video watching, not to mention for the bigger screen and better display versus the sound quality that will be better for the HTC One. So overall, I will give this one to the S4. So when it comes to cameras, these devices use very different technology. The Samsung Galaxy S4 uses a 13 megapixel camera, whereas the HTC One used a 4 ultra pixel camera. Although the idea of an ultra megapixel is really good, it doesn't. It kind of leaves wanting. And I did do a full camera comparison to check out all these photos, but over here I'm just going to go over two main distinctive ones. So first of all, we're just going to go over clarity with this one. And let's just pinch to zoom. One thing I did bring up in the photo review is you cannot actually pinch to zoom all the way in your photos with the HTC One. It will stop you. So just one thing I noted. Okay, now again, this does have the adaptive display, so it will vary on the screen, but one thing you notice right away is just the clarity and the detail, of course, especially when it comes to leaves as well as the flower. It's just a lot more detailed on the Samsung. Another thing I do want to point out is that in terms of the actual photos, HTC tends to wash out the photos. So I noticed it really on parts like this, where I'm not sure if you can see it. Let me turn actually one of the lights off so maybe you can see it a little bit better. On the Samsung you get depth in terms of shadow and then light, whereas the HTC One just tends to blend it in. In out bright sunny days, the HTC One is still letting more light through. The ultra megapixel isn't kind of distinguishing it because of the image processor isn't good enough to distinguish it. So what you're getting is basically really bright or washed out more so photos, because the actual colors of the leaves in the ground were closer to the Samsung. I know it seems like, oh, well, this is just more natural than this. No, it actually was like this. Like, they weren't like dying or like, you know, poorly grown. They were actually very strong, like they just had blossomed. And this was the actual color of the device. This is actually not true. So I found that really interesting, that the HTC was kind of over natural per se, or in just regular terms, like kind of washed out. So that's one thing we found with the photos. Now, how about low light? Because the ultra pixel is supposed to be the better for low light. However, we found a little bit of a difference here. So this is the HTC on low light, and I have gone over this on the reviews for the S4. But see, this would be what HTC wants to believe. Oh, look how much better the low light is compared to that one. Well, here's the thing about this, though. So when you actually compare these screens, this is on auto. However, the S4 has a feature called auto night detection. And when you turn that on one time, you can leave that on, and then you get photos like this. Which now, if we compare them, we can actually see when zooming in that the S4 is actually a lot sharper and a lot less noisy. We get a lot of pixelation on the HTC One. Hopefully you guys can see it. It's just really pixelated in comparison to the S4. So, oops. It's just really pixelated and unclear compared to the S4. Not only that, but we noticed a green tint on the low light photos for the Ultra Pixel. Again, this is more the fault of the image processor. Samsung uses Sony's image processor for theirs, and it just does a better job of producing low light photos. It was funny because the Sony rep at one time told me their image processor is actually better on the Samsung than it is on their own phone. So I find that really funny that Sony's kind of giving them the better version of even their own phones. So really, it's kind of interesting that although the HTC, boasts the ultra megapixel to be better low light, and that's why they said they went with it, it's actually not producing as good of a low light photo as just a regular 13 megapixel with a good image processor. Now, when it comes to gaming, both devices can run pretty much the same exact games. There's no real distinguishing difference starting off. However, as you start to kind of fill up your devices and run low on storage, I do find that the S4 kind of performs. On both these devices, I have about 1 to 2 gigs of free storage. on there, whereas the S4 is still performing a bit better. I think, again, this is just because of the slightly higher processor and more RAM that just helped the graphics card, which is the same on both devices. Overall, both are great for gameplay, but the LED screen just really makes the S4 just a bit above, but it is a slight advantage over the HTC One. And the other thing that you have to point out is you can connect things like the PS3 controller to the S4 directly, and this does not work on the HTC One. So because a lot of gamers on my channel have really enjoyed that, the fact that you can just connect the PS3 controller without rooting, without being a techie, you literally just plug and play, it works. That is a huge advantage for the S4. Now, when it comes to battery life, we obviously know that the Samsung S4 has a bit more milliamps in comparison to the HTC One. However, that's not the only thing that changes these two devices out. One thing is that in terms of battery percentage, the HTC One just definitely drains quicker compared to the S4. Actually, I really was curious about this, so one time I literally turned every feature off on the HTC One, and it was still draining battery. If you do that on the S4, or even if you have things like Wi-Fi on the S4, it pretty much won't drain. And that's just one thing, that the standby time on the S4 is much better. Now, both devices boast a power saving mode, with HTC always having theirs at the top, as where Samsung has theirs where you can move it to the top, or you can just have it on all their panels. Overall, the battery life will go to the S4 simply because it just does a better job, and it'll last more to the 9 and 10 p.m. of an average user day, whereas the HTC One will most likely be one you want to charge at the end of your work shift if you get off around 5, 6, or 7. In terms of extras, we can go over a couple of things. There is hardware extras and there's software extras. Obviously, the hardware extras, there's just really no comparison. The Samsung definitely has, things like removable battery, micro SD card slot, which just stand out. Both devices have an IR blaster, so you can control your TVs and top boxes. However, the Samsung is much more advanced in the fact that you can control DVD players, Blu-ray players, receivers, and other devices. Now, when it comes to software, both have their little tweaks. HTC mainly has 3 main tweaks, and that is 1, you have blink feed. 2, you have Sense, which definitely stands out more so in things like the app drawer, that is instead of the traditional Android way now, which has been for a while now, it uses the original Android up-scrolling, which was like on Gingerbread or Froyo. So a little backdated. Not to mention the fact that software-wise, first, the third thing, Zoe. Zoe is basically a collage video making app, which you can get as a third-party app for free. I think it's Magnifisto or something like that. Yeah, there you go. Magnisto. Which basically does the same thing as Zoe. So, but of course it is built in. With the Samsung, you have a plethora of features, some very useful, such as picking up your phone call with air gestures, things like Smart Pause, so as soon as you look away from your video, it will still operate. You have things like multi-view, which you can have 2 apps open at the same time, as well as dual shot, which means you can take a photo while looking at a photo, while being in the photo. And you have things like Polaris Office built in, so an Office suite built into the device. In terms of extras, the Samsung just has a beat. Not to mention that you also have the latest version of Android, while HTC is still backwards on 4.1 instead of Samsung, which has 4.2. This really doesn't bode well, especially since HTC in the last year has not done the quickest updates comparing to Samsung. 2 years ago, this was the exact opposite. HTC far beat Samsung in updates, but over the past year, Samsung has really kind of stuck to their guns when updating their devices, although carriers, of course, have been backdated on both devices. Overall, though, extras will go to the Samsung, just because you really get more out of a phone. All right. Now, price point, of course, is something. So for the devices, it kind of goes. It's really interesting, actually. For the HTC One, you have a $199 price point for 32 gig internal storage. However, you cannot increase this, so what you get is what you get. For the Samsung, you only get 16 gigs for $199. However, you can, of course, expand this with 64 gig storage. So you have the potential to have much more than the HTC, but starting off you have less. So depending on the user, that will make a difference. For their bigger storage amounts, it's $299 for the 64 gig of storage, whereas the Samsung 32 gig is $249. Now, overall, the 32 gig version, let's say if we were going for the biggest storage, for the 32 gig version and 64 gig memory card you can get for pretty much $50 off of like Amazon, you would essentially have 32 gigs more storage on the Samsung compared to the HTC One. However, with the entry-level price point, this one you get more storage, but you can't expand it, whereas this one you can expand it. So for this one, I'm giving a tie. It really goes to the users. Some users like more built-in storage and don't care if you can't expand it because of cloud services and things like that. However, a lot of users still to this day like external micro SD cards. This isn't iOS where people don't mind the ability not to expand. iOS users are very different from Android users. They don't mind that. But for Android users, you're taking away something that we've always had. And that's why it's just, no matter what, even if, say, like a lot of my viewers, like that are techie especially, don't mind, they don't care about external storage, consumers by far still do. A lot of consumers still want a micro SD card on Android just because they're used to it. So even if you don't like it, a lot of consumers still do. So for that reason, I will give this a tie. Depending on the price point and depending on the user, one will be better than the other. All right, let's tally them up and see which one is the best Android device of 2013. So between these, we go for look and feel. It goes to the HTC One, the aluminum body, all around different design. Really has been praised by many, so I, of course, will go for the popular sentiment, although I personally like the lighter feel to the S4. The populist beckons that the HTC One will, of course, win. In terms of web browsing, Samsung just gives a more consistent web browsing experience, although they're very, very close. I give it to Samsung not only for just a more consistent experience, but for the fact that you can do things like AirView to either magnify into your web browser, or as well you can use it to use drop-down menus just like a desktop would. For this reason, I do feel that the web browsing experience is going to be better on a S4. For music, we knew this would happen, of course. HTC front speakers. Front speakers are my Achilles heel, and I do love them. So I do love the better sound coming out of the HTC One, although I was surprised to see how close this one really went down to. In terms of movies, overall the experience is just a bit better on the S4, although the HTC One has the better sound because the speakers are on the front, and the Samsung has the better visual because of the slightly bigger display and definitely better display. You do have to take into account that with the Samsung, you can have split screen and pop-up play, which just allows you to do things while watching your videos instead of just being stuck to one app. In terms of camera, the S4 definitely is the best camera of the summer. There has been not a big phone to compare it to in terms of camera quality-wise. It has beat the iPhone and now the HTC One. Possibly there might be a Lumia to stand against it, and the 920 is still one of the best cameras out there. But for an Android or iOS camera, the Samsung Galaxy S4 has the best one to date. In terms of gaming, it slightly goes to the Samsung just because when we fill up the storages to about a gig worth of storage left over, we do notice that that's when the HTC definitely crawls compared to the S4, which does more consistent gameplay features. I therefore have to give it to the S4, not to mention the fact that you can still connect a PS3 controller to it and use a controller without rooting, which is you cannot do on the HTC One. In terms of battery life will go to the S4, has a better battery life overall, and just really is an all-day battery. I am, of course, a heavy user, yet I still get to about 10 p.m. with easily having my battery fill. The HTC One just definitely drains battery if you use it or not, which is rather annoying, quite frankly. In terms of extras, the Samsung just offers a lot more extras, and a lot more extras that are useful, really. Although a lot of reviewers that don't really know what they're talking about have called them gimmicks, I have actually pointed out where they're actually useful with the specific features. Not all of them are, of course, but it has more useful features than the HTC One tends to have. In terms of pricing, it really is depending on your forte. For that reason, it has to be a tie. One has more built-in storage for $199, as where the S4 has 16 gigs, but expandable memory. So depending on the type of user, they will like one or the other more. So that concludes it, guys. The Galaxy S4 is the winner. It is the top phone right now on the market, and it is the best phone to get for the entire summer. So I would get this and recommend this. It's looking like this will be the best phone of 2013. If you want to see more videos and more comparisons, make sure to check out TheAndroidGuy website on YouTube, or check out our website at TheAndroidGuy.com. Please give a like or thumbs up if you found this video informative. Thank you for watching. This has been RICKY, The Android Guy.